You can't have evidence of a lost civilization with no evidence of it around it. You can't have just one little anomaly and nothing else. Ancient civilizations would always leave behind something. And if they created something incredible, it would have to be a pretty significant civilization to do that. Because you can't have a culture that has primitive means to then create something incredible. They would have to have the resources, the time, right? You'd have to have a certain kind of civilization that's reached a certain maturity to be able to even create anything like we're talking about. So we got to be very careful just to lump any culture in the past to be able to do these things. No, that's not how it worked. But also, in the case of the Sage Wall in Montana, that area would not only have been under glaciation at times because it moved up and down, but it would have been literally inhospitable. There probably wasn't even life there. And I mean that, probably not even life. Even animals that are rugged like moose and bears and things, that area would have been, there would have been any food. It would have been like a barren wasteland in that area. Now,
what was Jimmy's case for this?
It's just that the stones and this getting attention because it looks like they're megaliths.
But that's it, you're saying?
That's it. They're in a way where they're cracked, where it looks like someone took a bunch of stones like we see in other parts of the world and put them together. And so with someone that doesn't have a background on climatology and geology, they're going to immediately jump on that and be like, oh my God, look at those megaliths, without even considering for a moment if an ancient culture could have lived there, if there's any evidence that an ancient culture was there, or like anything. We got to be very careful to throw out all these accusations without having any evidence to back it up or having any background to be able to explain it. And I feel like that's no better right now as an example would be the Richat structure of Mauritania.
Yeah, I hear this pronounced a couple different ways. Richat.
Okay,
so and this I did want to talk with you about because Jimmy made some really interesting videos about that.
And I'd love to break it down.
Where basically he was saying this, as you said, this Richat structure in Mauritania has the geological makings of what could be Atlantis. And this has to do with something you had discussed on the previous podcast, where you had Solon from the ancient Greek Empire go to visit Sais in Egypt.
Yes.
And
good memory.
And he talked with a high priest there, I think, in one of the libraries or something.
Sancius.
Okay, so you know the name of the guy. And
he was the elder priest of the entire Temple of Sais.
What did he say? That dude said it was like 9,000 years before Atlantis existed, and that would line up directly with the Younger Dryas.
9,000 years before Plato. And then if you add when Plato lived, you get 11,600 years ago, which is exactly when we find these catastrophes, according to the Younger Dryas, on Earth.
Right. So Jimmy was saying that there was also some writings that talked about concentric circles, 2 by land, 3 by sea.
Sure.
Is that right?
Yeah. So what that comes from is the Sancius and the temple priest of Sais told Solon detailed descriptions of Atlantis. It was not this that he told him that it existed, but more so they actually told him everything they knew about Atlantis. I think maybe they knew that they needed to do that. It was the only place that had recorded it. Well, imagine you're a priest and you're elder priest and you're in this temple and you literally are the only ones that have like the story of Atlantis, because your job as a temple priest of Sais is to be an archaic library of history.
And they're also translating hieroglyphics. Is there a way they could have translated this incorrectly though?
No, they're telling him, like they're talking to him. And they actually also said that the story of Atlantis and some of the things about that ancient past was written to the walls of the Temple of Sais. Now that's outside Alexandria today in Egypt. It doesn't exist anymore because it was destroyed less than 500 years after that discovery by Plato. We never hear about the Temple of Sais ever again, which is really interesting. It makes me wonder, like, somebody found out about that and went down and just wiped it out. But I can tell you it disappeared from history, and we don't know what ever happened to it ever again. The Temple of Sais. And the elder priests and all of that. We never heard from them ever again.
How big was that place?
The Temple of Sais was built on this peninsula next to the Nile River. And it was this really important location for them. They looked out over the ocean, and they picked it because it was like
Mediterranean?
Yeah, over the ocean. And they picked it because it was like a sacred spot, and they built this incredible temple. And they used it as a means similar to the Library of Alexandria, but they built it more to be like a record of ancient history. Of their ancient history, because the Egyptians were integrally connected to the Atlanteans, according to them. Okay? So Plato finds out all these details from Solon and Socrates and Diodorus, all these individuals, and he writes down and records what they told him. Well, they must have written down too. Obviously, they didn't printed it. Solon obviously wrote everything down that Sanchez and the temple priests of Sais told him, right? And then he must have brought it all back and then showed them all. Well, Plato, so to fast forward, the reason why Jimmy is saying those claims about the Richat structure is that in those descriptions, it's described what Atlantis looks like. Like it describes it as having 3 eccentric lines of land with water around it, with a central island in the middle, okay? And that it opens up to the southwest, and that it has mountains to the north.
Just to be clear, I think it's concentric, right?
It's
Some people are
concentric, thank you.
picturing it, so it's basically like circle.
Yeah,
around a circle,
concentric
around a
circles. Thank you. Yeah, and that description was very, very well documented by Plato. Very well documented. If something's hypothetical, why would you literally describe it in such a specific way like that? It doesn't. And he even said it's not. He said it's a real history. Anyway, in those descriptions, we get really, really good understanding of where Atlantis roughly is. Now, Randall Carlson, to me, is the greatest mind that exists today on Atlantis history. I believe that he truly has unpacked it in a way that nobody has. Geologically, well, he's taken the knowledge of Atlantis and then mapped it out geologically and climatology to figure it out. He's basically looked at how, if Atlantis is described as being found west of the Pillars of Hercules, which is the Straits of Gibraltar, but that it's a continent described as a continent in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. A small continent. It's described as a small continent of islands that have a central island with what's called the Temple of Poseidon in the center. Okay? And that this city was the central city of Atlantis, but there were other cities. Now, the central city of Atlantis, you would come in from a boat and there would be an access point to the southwest. And the center was the Temple of Poseidon in the center of all their government. He describes it all really, really well. The problem is that, here's the issue. The Richat structure, which you have up there right now, is, for those who don't know, it's a gigantic geologic formation in Mauritania, Africa, which is Western Africa. And it is found near the Atlas Mountains. And Jimmy was digging into Herodotus, the ancient Herodotus map. He was a historian, as well as others who have had it written names down there on ancient maps. One of them was Atlanta, something similar to Atlantis in that area, as well as one of the biggest things that he dug into was the kings of Mauritania. Because the kings of Mauritania, and this is true, I agree with him on this, I do think that this is part of the Atlantean region.
Well, hold
I don't want to say it's not, okay?
Alessi, can you pull up the map of where this is, where the Richat structure is?
And probably a satellite image above it, too, after.
Just in relation to the continent of Africa? Because I have a question about this. So
Sure.
He's going to pull it up. We'll put it in the corner of the screen. But essentially, on the western part of Africa, this is fairly inland. This is
this is way inland. This is more than 50 to 100 miles inland.
Right. So we have it right there.
Right.
This is pretty far.
Can you put terrain on for me, bud?
Is there a
Bottom
left? Hit that. Yeah. Is there?
No, right. That's good. That's good. Leave
is
that on.
there
Leave that on.
a
That's good.
geologic explanation as to how, when the Younger Dryas period happened, if this had existed, say, on the coast, it now exists there?
So when we look at the Younger Dryas, we do need to recognize that there were catastrophes that were devastating on the Earth.
Yeah.
And there were plate movements in some places.
Yeah.
The best evidence for that is we see that down in South America. There is definitely some plate movements with the Andes. Now, having said that, though, we don't have any evidence geologically that it was able to uplift entire continents, okay, by over 1,000 feet. Now, that structure in Mauritania is at over 1,500 feet elevation. So over 1,000 feet elevation above the ocean. Now, what I want to point out that's fascinating is, you see that area of sand that flows from the northeast? It looks like just this bright sand and goes all the way to the ocean on the west side of Mauritania. Not that, below it. That whole thing. If you zoom in on that for a minute, specifically more towards the area of the Richat. Right there, that mountain, right there in the center.
Yes.
Look at how the sand, you see how it looks?
Yeah, it's like almost like
I
it blew
agree
off.
with Jimmy that was a massive flood went through there. You see evidence that the Mediterranean looks like it flooded with a tsunami that actually overflowed in northern Africa and then flowed all the way across the Sahara and met with the Atlantic Ocean. Can you zoom way out for a minute while we're talking about that for a second? So you show you how big that is. Just zoom out. Keep going. Try to imagine. You see how that huge depression in the center there?
Yes.
Okay, now keep going up and now look where the Mediterranean is. Look. Look all the way to Egypt. You can almost see where the sand moves between the mountains, right? Yep, exactly.
Oh,
Now imagine
wow.
a tsunami so big wipes out the ancient Egyptians, wipes out the whole region. We find salt. Find salt encrusted over 50 feet up on the pyramids of Giza.
Wait,
Salt.
Alessi, can you go east past Libya for a sec? Okay. So there's Egypt over there.
Right. So it looks like the wave must have come in right at Tunisia.
Tunisia,
yeah, right in
yeah.
that area, right there. You can see that,
And then you
flowed
could
all the
see
way
more
across.
similar ideas over by Egypt.
Now,
no?
so imagine enormous tsunamis flowing over this region. Enormous.
Yeah, look at by the way, go over to like Saudi Arabia.
There's another
Go-
one you
go
can
over there.
see. You can see that where it flowed right
Whoa.
in. Yeah, exactly. Imagine sand moving from massive waves, and I mean massive, sometimes over a mile high. Okay, and they're moving across the region, and they did go across that during the Younger Dryas. I believe that is remnants from the Younger Dryas, from enormous water flowing across the land. Okay. Problem is, though, that Mauritania area with the Richat structure is at 1,500 feet elevation. And if we want to, Plato gives measurements of how big the concentric circles are at Atlantis. He gives exact, he calls them, they're in stadias. It's like the ancient Greek measurement for a certain distance, right? He measures them and gives exact measurements for it. When you go and you try to measure the Richat structure, it's like 3 to 4 times as big. It is way too big. When I mean way too big,
How big is the Richat structure?
The Richat structure is massive. It's like it's over half a mile across. It is absolutely huge. If you want to go back west, I'll show you where it is.
25-mile dome? No, that can't be it.
No, it probably is.
Yeah?
I don't have the exact. I don't have the exact dimensions on it, but zoom right in on that for me.
Yeah, it says 25-mile right there. I don't know if that's
So,
accurate or not.
20
Yeah, I was gonna say it has to be more than
miles.
half a mile. That's not that big.
Oh, I know. I didn't know.
really
That's why I just
small.
said more. I didn't know exactly how big it was. Thank you for clarifying that, Alessi. So 25 miles across. That
Even
is
that's-
insane.
Yeah, but even that seems small for what Atlantis. I mean, maybe not.
Try not to think of Atlantis as being that
Manhattan's
city.
a 7 Mile island, right?
Try to imagine it's more like that's a city within a landmass,
Yeah.
not the whole thing.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
And that's an enormous city.
Gotcha.
And so that's why I don't think Randall brings up a lot of other really good points. Number one, the elevation's way too high. Number two, there's no remnants of anything on the ground that have ever been connected to ancient civilizations or history. There have been expeditions that have gone there on the ground and have looked at it, and they're very underwhelming. It looks
What
really.
does he think it is?
Well, it's Randall has, and I agree with Randall on this. And I think it does actually agree with the mainstream, is that there was an ancient volcano here, an ancient volcano that had basalt rings around it, and over time it eroded to create this massive circular dome like that.
Could it have eroded for the Younger Dryas coming through?
That probably helped erode it, but it was probably eroding a lot older than that. I mean, I think
I mean, I should say not. In my case, I'm not referring to like as much erosion versus I'm saying more of like a catastrophic.
yeah, like I imagine, like if you look at geologic history of something like that, that was probably formed like 1 million years ago.
Wow.
So this is not. Here's the interesting thing. I will give Jimmy credit on this. The Mauritanian kings there's some connection there. The kings of Mauritania.
How so?
Well, if you look into the lineage of the kings of Mauritania, they talk about how the first king was called Atlas. And Atlas is related to the Atlantic Ocean and is related to all the lore and the talk about how there were divine kings. Diodorus discusses this. Divine kings that had ruled the region, and that Atlantis was more than just that one landmass, that they were governing a pretty enormous area, to the point where, remember that ancient Tibetan map that was found in 1901
Yes.
in Tibet? It showed the region of Atlantis going from the Pillars of Hercules, the Atlantic, all the way to the
Right.
Caribbean. all the way to Yucatan.
And that's where I get confused too, because then I start thinking of it completely that way, rather than, when we're focused here, we're focused on maybe the central.
Well,
there's
there's a capital, like any place. Like there was a capital, right? They're Washington D.C.
But what do we call it when we talk about it? The lost city of Atlantis?
Right.
And then we refer to the entire thing as Atlantis, when maybe we need to make the distinction there. I'm just throwing this one out there that we need to refer to the city as Atlantis. And the greater thing is the Empire.
Atlantean civilization. We could call that, right?
Okay. All right.
And then the city. Well, actually, it wasn't even called. The city wasn't even called Atlantis. Isn't that funny that we bring that up right now?
What was it called?
It was Poseidon.
Fuck that. Atlantis is a way better name.
Well, the central island had the Temple of Poseidon, and the entire city was built after Poseidon. The entire thing was built in honor of this great. Which, by the way,
where did we get the name Atlantis from?
Well, Atlantis comes from the Atlantic Ocean. And because
and we just made that up, historians later?
No, it came from the kings of Atlas, who were the direct lineage that came out of Atlantis from the kings of Mauritania, which is why I said there's a connection there.
Oh.
Yes. So I do agree that this region did have an ancient history. And I do think that it's possible that, and Randall even admitted this too, that there was remnants of Atlantis who they were in the area. But I don't think, and Randall doesn't think either, and I don't want to speak for him, but based on the scientific evidence and understanding climatological history and understanding what Plato said about the central city of Atlantis, that this is that. It just happens to look really similar. That's it. And that's the same thing as the Sage Wall in Montana. Or Devil's Watchtower, that dike that volcanic dike that's in Wyoming. That was not an ancient tree. Okay? Just because it looks like that doesn't mean it is. Sage Wall was not an ancient wall. It was simply just a set of granite cliffs that split. When you get micro amounts of water in between them and you get a flash freeze, you split rock. It's actually really easy to split rock when it freezes.
Alessi, can you Google something real quick? Because we can't play Jimmy's video, obviously, because it's copyright. But can you Google summary of Jimmy Corsetti's
points?
Right. Atlantis case? Let's see if we can get some.
Because it's like it opens up to the southwest. It has mountains to the north. It has 3 eccentric lines of land with water. That's what essentially he's jumping on.
Want to go Reddit or?
Yeah. Let's do that.
And of course, he made it on Joe talking about that. But
go back. Go up. What's that first one? Atlantis Reloaded. Okay. I'm going to start reading this. This is an article.
Sure,
from,
go ahead.
Go up real quick, Alessi, from July 25th, 2023 on diggingupAncientAliens.com. Is the Richat Structure the location of the fabled city of Atlantis? According to Jimmy Corsetti, it might be. The Atlantis story may be one of those myths that inspire numerous theories and speculations, but what happens if we apply a scientific approach to this story told by Plato in his works Timaeus and Critias? It's a little small, the text, sorry.
Yeah.
We open the archaeologist's toolbox and a historical approach to the literary works of Plato. How does Plato's story hold up? And was he really trying to give us a literal account from a philosophical perspective? Oh, you know what? This is a write-up for episodes that are on YouTube right there. What are the historical sources? No, it's just going through.
I can tell you what he uses if you can't find it.
The Jimmy Corsetti mistake. As we have seen, claiming to have found the location of Atlantis is to miss the point a bit of Plato's story. But Jimmy Corsetti claims to have found what he believes is Atlantis' actual location, the Richat Structure. The issue is that when you can throw a dart on the world map, wherever it lands, the likelihood of someone claiming it as the location of Atlantis is quite significant. People have suggested places all over the world to be the inspiration and locations of Atlantis. My favorite claims are Claus Rudbeck, who in 1679 suggested Gamia Uppsala in Sweden be Atlantis. We also have a Finnish tour guide or eccentric Ian Bach, who claimed Atlantis to be in Finland. Just because the numerous claims of Atlantis location, this does not invalidate Corsetti's claims. Sorry, there are some typos here, so I'm struggling reading it. But it does raise a bit of a red flag when we encounter these types of claims. Suppose Sweden, Bahamas, Malta, America, and India are possible locations. In that case, something is a bit off since they are so incredibly different. To be fair, Corsetti did not come up with this idea. He repeats the claims by George Alexander and Natalis Rosen made in their 2018 documentary Visiting Atlantis.
Yeah.
I went with Corsetti's video because it's publicly available on YouTube and is a more extensive spread. let's look at the claims themselves. Corsetti
Sure.
claims that the Richat structure is a good fit because it has concentric rings. This is true. The formation that consists of an eroded dome had sedimentary rock visible that looks like rings. We know quite a lot of the site's geology that has been known since at least the 1940s. The dome was what I can find described from a journal by Frenchman Richard Millard in 1948. Later, the French naturalist Theodore Monde launched an expedition in the 50s, resulting in further publications on the area. In the beginning, the Richat Dome was often referred to as Richat Crater. For some time, there was an idea that it was formed
Impact
by
crater.
a meteoric impact. We today know a lot about the structure and how it was formed. In 2005, for example, Matten et al. Published a paper clearly demonstrating the formation of the dome and the geological processes involved. Now, I'm not a geologist, and I'm sure I'd butcher the explanation of the processes from hypothermal infill and magmatism in the structure and how I'm going to fuck that up, fluidization caused dissolving in the dome. The structure has been dated with argon, dated to be formed around 98.2 plus minus 2.6 million years ago.
Yeah, so 100 million years ago.
Okay.
100 million years ago.
Well, let's read one more paragraph. But to say the least, we know quite a bit about the geological process in the area. All this makes Corsetti's statement that, quote, in fact, the Richat structure wasn't even discovered until the Gemini 4 mission in 1965 and is now a common landmark utilized by astronauts, unquote, a bit odd, to say the least. Since Jimmy Corsetti doesn't give his sources for the videos, say where he got this, I can only tell you that this is entirely wrong, something that makes his explanation of the formation even weirder because he gets the process almost correct, except he says that this can't be proven. I suspect that Corsetti has not read any of the studies on the dome, but repeats secondary sources that leave information out, showing us that we can all be victims of fraud and the importance of checking the sources.
Ooh.
Wow.
Wow,
Okay.
that's quite an ending there.
Damn, I really like those videos.
Well, I think it's important that we talk about where, like, Randall Carlson and I, based on the evidence, think Atlantis was. Okay? Well, based on the descriptions, I think there's some very plausible, and you want to pull up, hey, can you scroll over? Can you go to the Azores for me?
Has Jimmy responded to some of Randall's stuff on that? I'd love to see that.
I'm not.
He's
Like,
like
you could
really-
have just stayed on where you were, bud.
He knows.
Oh, okay.
He knows what happened.
You're just out of focus on Matt right
Oh, and out of focus on that.
Yeah.
He
Just a map, yeah.
He basically. I mean, he's put together like a lot of good stuff. That seems unfortunate right there. But I'd love to hear him go at it with
Satellite?
Randall to try to
Right.
figure this out.
Satellite? Okay. Right, stay there right for a minute. Okay. So the Mauritanian structure is down in Africa on that corner there, sort of near that dark area of sand. Now, above it, you can see Spain, Portugal, and the Straits of Gibraltar right there,
Yes.
okay? Now, Plato's descriptions, like, I agree 100% with Randall on this. Plato's descriptions are incredibly accurate for... And Randall is very cautious saying that he doesn't think Atlantis there. He thinks it's the most likely location. And I respect that. I agree. I think the most likely location, geologically, climatologically, and looking at and reading the descriptions from the Timaeus and Cretaeus, is that location. Look at the ocean for a second. So that is called the Azores. It's a set of volcanic islands that sticks above the ocean. Now notice, do you see how the landmass is really, really dark, or the water is very dark blue all around it?
Yes.
But notice in the center, you have a giant area that has what looks like more shallow land. You see that?
Yes.
Okay. That is what's called an ancient sunken continent, because it is found at the location not of 2, but of 3 plates. 3 tectonic plates interact there. You get the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, and you also get, coming in from the Eurasian side, another plate that bumps up against that.
Whoa.
Now, they're not coming together. They're what's called pulling apart. Okay? So imagine...
How do we determine that?
Imagine plates can do 3 things. Plate tectonics in the earth, basically, that's what represents all the changes that undergo in a major way with the earth, like volcanoes going off. It's often because plates will shift a little bit, right? And you get something that disturbs it and will send off an earthquake or a volcano. Plates will either come together, ride up over the top of each other, or they'll subduct under each other. Or in some cases, they can even pull apart. Because, I mean, riding over each other and running each other is the same thing. So there's 3 things that it can do. And in this area, the way that the plates are interacting, and this is going to blow your mind, is that they're pulling apart. Imagine a description of Atlantis being that parts of the landmass are like falling into the ocean.
Yes.
And then eventually in one night and day, the entire amount of the continent kind of sinks and disappears beneath the ocean. Well, it'd be very easy for that to happen if plates are pulling apart in a very significant way and a major event happens. Imagine that. Two plates are pulling apart. The land underneath it is all these things are happening, earthquakes and all these things. And it literally just subducts itself. The whole entire continent literally subducts beneath the ocean. And all that's left are the highest mountaintops of the volcanoes, which become what we know of as the Azores.
Whoa. God, so you could just look at a map of the world and look at all these little spots around the world and even some of the big ones and just be like, not that long ago,
Right.
it was in a totally different spot or wasn't.
And I want to show you one more thing. Can you go off of North America and keep that satellite image on? I want to show you one more thing that's been a while. Go west. Yep. Now go off of you see that light area off of North America, off of where we are right now. That's called the Continental Divide.
That's right.
Yes. Now follow that down off of New Jersey and New York. I want you to see something really quick. Zoom in right there where it gets deep. Go right along the edge of that shelf. Yeah, go a little bit south though, like more towards, yeah, right there. Zoom in on the edge of that, really. Go in close. Keep going. Those. Do you know what those are?
No.
Those canyons, and you can get closer to the divide if you want. Yes. Now follow those up. Now we'll see how many there are. If you keep going along that, notice all of them. Just along the edge though, along the edge of the shelf. Keep going north or something or south. You see them all? See how many there are?
These.
Yes. Now what that means is that during the younger Dryas, the last ice age, the land of the United States came out almost all the way to there. You can just follow it. It's very, very easy to see.
And then the glacier, through its melting, added that sea.
The oceans then flooded over and then drowned all those areas. Okay?
Whoa.
You see how extensive that shelf is? Now, I want to add another layer to you. Go into some of those canyons right there, right in front of you, right below you.
Approximate, and if you don't know this off the top of your head, no worries. Approximately how deep does it get on the upper shelf?
It goes from only 400 or 500, like several hundred feet deep, to thousands right away, instantly.
Yeah, like the Titanic's how far down? Like
Titanic's 12,000 feet down.
Yeah.
Okay? Now,
that's far.
Now, imagine for a minute, just try to wrap your head around massive Laurentide ice sheet moving down. It's very cold. And imagine an event happens. That event, maybe solar activity, cosmic impact, that's up for debate during the Younger Dryas. Or maybe there was two events on either end. But either way, imagine that glacier 2 miles deep, covering half the entire North America, melting. Okay? That is, now let's add on, see those canyons?
Over how long a period of time? When you snap your finger?
50 to 100 years, maybe less. Maybe we don't know. Randall talks about it, how fast some of these events could occur. We don't know. Maybe years, maybe less. Again, we have to try to imagine some of these could have been even shorter than that. So now those canyons, now there's even a national ocean sanctuary for those canyons called something about Seamonts and National Canyons. You look it up in the United States, where they actually went out, and because they're so deep and so significant geologically, they protected the area, and they created seamount national preservation areas for them. The reason I'm trying to say that is those canyons. You ready? Those canyons, some of them are deeper than the Grand Canyon,
and
they're in the ocean.
So I've seen videos of stuff like this.
Yeah,
but you're saying that something like the obvious connotation I'm taking there is that something like the Grand Canyon existed at maybe a lower level before this, and so the Grand Canyon, because of where it is geologically, didn't get sunk, but it does here.
Yeah, well, imagine though more like massive outflows that are so insane coming off of that glacier. They're feeding all the way off the Continental Divide and dropping off this ledge-like structure that goes in, right?
Yeah.
But it's so much water that they're able to carve canyons that are thousands of feet deep from a single event. That's what I'm talking about. This isn't over time. These aren't rivers that have been flowing for millions of years. Look at the outflow rivers on that. That may have come from a period of being created in like that.
Yeah.
Like instantly. And the reason I'm telling you that is think about the power behind that. The power behind all those glaciers flooding, creating canyons deep in the Grand Canyon, the continents like being submerged in some places. And then Atlantis, literally because of plate tectonics, just the whole piece of those continents just subducts into the ocean and disappears. And that's exactly how it's described, which is why the Azore Plateau is literally, it's a sunken plateau. It's a sunken continent, is the most perfect place. And I'd go further than Randall because he's more careful than I am. I'd say that was,
You got that right.
I do believe that's where Atlantis was.
You believe, point to it on the map.
That right there.
Right there.
Yes. I believe that those tops of those mountains are the remnants of that continent. And that everything described in that is pretty much perfect. Because you can look at that. Look at the underwater parts. You can see where all the landmass and the islands tried to come up, but they got submerged.
Azores volcano. Hold on, let's see, searching something here.
Sure.
He's on to something. This is what look like?
It's a highly volcanic area, see? Huge volcanoes. Yeah. See? I mean, it has the past
I
of
gotta
that
go
area.
visit this place.
Oh, Azores is beautiful, man. A gorgeous area. I haven't been there yet, but I would love to. So the Azores is an incredibly highly volcanic and dangerous area during certain times of history, okay? And what's further is that Plato discusses how Atlantis had a lot of amazing animals, like elephants. Did you know that?
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is that the Azores is found in this very, very warm area relative to its latitude because of the Gulf Stream. It's like a warmer
Because
area.
of the Gulf Stream?
The Gulf Stream is a current that comes off of Florida that flows up off the North America.
And it makes things warmer?
It's the only reason why most people can live in Sweden, Norway, Finland, and a lot of Northern Europe. Only reason.
God, I love learning stuff on this podcast.
Okay, well, so
I
let
never
me
looked at this.
explain ocean currents for a minute.
Yeah.
Ocean currents are based on this interaction between warm, like ocean salt water, and more dense fresh water. And what happens is when you have this perfect balance of the two, it creates this movement of energy, right? Heat moves up from the Bahamas and the Caribbean, and it moves off of Florida, and then it moves right up through the Atlantic Ocean, and it's literally the only reason why people can live in Iceland. Iceland would be just a solid ice cap, just solid ice. But because the Gulf Stream brings this warmer water up, it allows places like that to have a much warmer climate than they should. Like, for instance, where we are right now, we're the same latitude as Spain, and yet Spain is like a very mild place. Think about that for a second, because of the Gulf Stream. Now, the Gulf Stream, though, potentially has been a major component in how some of these disasters and ice ages and different events, I believe, are directly related.